Hey guys, what's going on? Jacob here. So we have the basics for CSS down. Now it's time to do really cool things on the page with CSS. Today we'll learn about different effects you can do with elements, how to apply transitions and transformations, and even do a little bit of animation. So let's get started. So first we'll start off with some image effects, and one of the easiest is opacity and transparency. All you need to do is to apply the opacity rule to the element that you want to be transparent or semi-transparent. This rule accepts a decimal number between 1 and 0 as a parameter, which is the percentage of opacity for the element. So 1 is fully opaque, 0.5 is half opaque, and 0 is fully transparent. You can also change the opacity for a background using the background rule and the RGBA function, with the last parameter acting the same as the opacity rule. You can also reflect elements, namely images, across the page as well. This one, however, is a little bit trickier because it's not supported across all browsers yet, just Safari and Chrome. And because of that, we'll have to use the WebKit prefix when naming this rule. But to achieve this effect, we'll use the box reflect rule. This rule accepts two values. First, the direction of the reflection, and second, the offset or space in between the images. And just like that, we have our reflection. You also might want to add some effects to your text as well. These aren't exactly advisable on account of them being bad design, but here's how to do them anyway. We'll start with text stroke, which is similar to the stroke property in Illustrator. It is different from the border rule, which if we applied it here would just be a border around the text. To apply this rule, use the WebKit text stroke property with the width of the stroke and the color. Again, this is only available for Chrome and Safari at the moment. And once we apply this rule, here's how that text will look. You can also use a shadow to the text to show some depth. Again, I don't really advise using this on any serious website. Fortunately, this does have wide browser support, so we won't need any prefixes this time. So to apply this rule, use the text shadow property. This accepts four values: the right to left offset, the up and down offset, the blur of the shadow, and the color of the shadow. And this is how the text shadow should appear on the page. Slightly more applicable and usable is the box shadow property, which works similar to the text shadow property. However, we are going to need to use the WebKit and Moz prefixes in order for it to work in all browsers. So to get this to work, you'll use the box shadow property. This accepts five values: the right to left offset, the up and down offset, the blur for the shadow, the spread radius of the shadow, and the color of the shadow. So if we apply it to this div, this is how it should look. With CSS, you can also transform elements on the page. You accomplish this with the transform rule and then one of four functions: translate, rotate, scale, and skew. Translate moves the element from its current position on the page based on the X measurement and Y measurement parameters. Rotate, well, rotates the element based on the degrees that you give it. Scale changes the size of the element based on the parameters that you give it. So if you apply scale 2, the element will be twice as large. Likewise, if you apply scale 0.5, the element will be half as large as the original. Finally, skew tilts the element by the degrees that you define in the parameter. So say you have a button with a background color of red, and when you hover over it, the background color changes to blue. When you look at that button on the page and hover over it, the change happens instantaneously. But what if you want that change to happen over a period of time? Maybe you want a transition. Fortunately, that's pretty easy. We just apply the transition rule, like this, to the area where we're applying the rules for our button. The transition rule takes in four values. The first is the property that we're transitioning. This could be color, background color, border, or the like. Or all if we want all of the properties to have this transition. Note, not all of the properties are able to have a transition, but the vast majority do. Next, we define the duration of the transition in seconds. Then we set our timing function, or how the transition will look over the time. If you want a constant transition, you'll use linear. Otherwise, you can use ease, ease in, ease out, or ease in out. Finally, we can set a delay, which holds off the transition by a certain time period in seconds from when we trigger the change. Unfortunately, you will have to use prefixes for the transition rule to work in all browsers. And finally, you can create some animation with CSS using keyframes. To do this, use @keyframes and give it a name, like test admin. Then inside the curly brackets, place a set of keyframes. Each of these keyframes defines what the element looks like at a percentage of time in the animation. So each keyframe has a percentage and a mini style sheet. Then we'll use the animation rule and apply this animation to the element. The animation rule is similar to transitions, but instead you'll mainly use keyframe animation, time, and repeat. So if we place this in our CSS, our page should look like this. Pretty cool, eh? Even after learning all these cool things you can do with CSS, it can be a bit hard to put them all together to do amazing things. Fortunately, there are places out there where people will put transitions, animations, and transformations together to create really cool effects. CodeMyUI.com is a great place where people have done just that. There are a lot of really cool effects for text, buttons, and other elements that I've used on projects before, and there are a lot more out there that I might use in projects to come. So I highly recommend going out there and being inspired and seeing what you can use on your projects. But that's all for today. Next time we'll talk about CSS frameworks like Bootstrap and Foundation. But in the meantime, what questions do you have over what we went over today? Leave them down in the comments below and I'll do my best to answer them. But until next time, good luck and happy coding.